Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We greatly appreciate your time. So we'll give everyone just a second to go ahead and log in. As a quick reminder, if you can locate the chat box, there's some information in there for you that is helpful or would be helpful as an FYI. We will send you a copy of the recording today automatically and a copy of the slides as well. So thank you for your time today, especially on what is most people's lunch hour, to talk about 3 steps to creating more meaningful career goals. If you're anything like me or any of our other clients, you know, we start the new year out with all of these great resolutions, right? And different goals that we want to achieve personally as well as professionally. And too often, again, I have this issue as well. Too often, it's not that we're not setting the right goals necessarily, but sometimes we're not as motivated to achieve those goals. You know, time passes, we get distracted by other things, etc. So what we're going to be talking about today is how to create more meaningful professional goals for yourself so that you're much more motivated to achieve them. And also they're the kind of right or correct ones for you to be working towards as well. So just by way of quick introduction here, I'm a certified career coach, speaker, and author. Hallie Crawford is my name, and I'm located in Atlanta, Georgia. Our webinar today is hosted by Georgia State. So for fellow alum and students out there, welcome, as well as friends of Create Your Career Path as well, which is my company. I've been coaching and training since 2002. I love what I do. We have coaches on our team and staff that love what they do as well. And this is our sweet spot. We really enjoy helping people find greater meaning and fulfillment in their work. I have an undergraduate degree from Vanderbilt University and a master's degree from the University of Illinois. And I've been partnered with Georgia State for at least the last 3 to 5 years in different ways. So for those of you who are just joining us, just as a couple quick admin items here. Number one, you should be able to hear me okay, as well as see my slides. If for any reason you cannot, if you could just put something in the chat about that, I'll make sure I get that fixed. We are going to share automatically the recording with you as well as the slides. So you'll get both of those. And we're streaming live on YouTube, which is where the recording will be housed. So take a look at the chat box so that you've got those admin items and you know kind of what to expect. And because we tend to cover, in a good way, a lot of helpful information, what I would suggest you do is choose one action step from today that makes the most sense for you and where you're at with establishing meaningful career goals. And then remember, you can revisit the recording and the slides later on. So pick something that you can take on in the next week, and then you can revisit things later so that you've got something practical, tangible, and actionable to take away from today versus hopping off and then the phone rings and other things happen, which I know happens, life happens. But we really want you to stay the course with what we're talking about today. So here's our agenda. Is for the next approximately 30 minutes, give or take, we'll end at the half hour. We're going to talk about, in order to identify meaningful career goals, why it's important to identify and discard any external definitions, how we might be defining ourselves professionally and even personally, by the way, that don't work for us anymore and we need to move aside or push aside. Number 2 is clarifying your values, because we want people to establish their professional goals in alignment with their professional values. That's going to make them more meaningful, therefore more motivating, and also the right ones for you. And then step number 3, and I just realized it says key number 3. Sorry about that. It should be step number 3, is to identify and align your goals with each of the pieces of our ideal career model. Because what we find is that if people do that, they're going to be more mindful about establishing goals. They're going to cover all of their bases in order to steer their career in the right direction so that it's the right fit in the long run. And all of the goals that they establish are going to be much more meaningful to you or for you as a result. If you'd like to set up a consult with us at any point during the time today or afterwards, I put a link to that in the chat box, and I'm happy to answer questions from everything that we're talking about today or anything else. You can set up a consult by using the QR code on this page as well. So let's go ahead and dive into the meat of things. So the reason why it's so important to talk about what we're discussing today is that clearer goals make a huge difference in people's lives, in boosting people's sense of motivation, sense of purpose, and the fact that you're actually going to be more likely to achieve them. If you look at the survey results here, 50% of people say having a clearer goal and really specific and defined helps me achieve it more in a lot of different ways. And that's part of what's important today, is not just aligning your goals with your values in the career model, but making sure that they're really clearly defined for you. And what does it mean for you, or what would it mean if you achieved that goal? Having that vision or image is a huge motivator as well. And the good news, and obviously why we're here today, is that for the past, since 2002, since we've been coaching, we have found that people are actually able to infuse, so to speak, a greater sense of passion, purpose, meaning into their work life. And we love getting emails and calls from people saying, I'm in my brand new job and I'm so excited. Thank you. That's so rewarding to us. And the other thing that we feel like is good news is, although I know there's a lot going on with layoffs in the economy and uncertainty out there, and we have a webinar coming up to help you with your resume. So we'll tell you about that closer to the end for you to register for that, is that we still do feel like employers are listening more than they really ever have about workers and employees wanting greater life balance, having a greater sense of meaning, etc. Okay. So we do feel like this is more feasible, if you will, than it really ever has been in our history, because more people are kind of demanding or desiring this work-life balance, etc. So 2 things that we want to suggest as a starting point on the bottom right-hand side of this slide, and then we'll keep going, is it's really important when you're thinking about meaningful career goals to get rid of and try not to think in terms of should. Well, this should be one of my goals. Because if the word should is coming up in your mind, it probably means that goal is coming from somewhere else and not truly from inside of you, something that you truly actually want. Now, I realize we all have bosses and our employer is going to set and establish some of our goals. So I get that. But as much as possible, if you're coming up with your own goals, let's say, or your own take on them, if you're saying should to yourself, kind of the running joke with coaches is, and this is silly, but they say don't should on yourself. Okay. That means it's coming from somewhere else and you need to watch out for that. And then we want you to, bottom line, align all of your professional goals as much as possible. You may not be able to have every single one checking all of these boxes, but as much as you can, align those goals with your values, your strengths, and our ideal career model. And the reason why we talk about your strengths is because when you are in a job that leverages your strengths in the way that you want it to, you're going to feel fulfilled. And if you don't, if you're in a job or a career path that doesn't leverage your strengths, you're actually not going to be fulfilled and rewarded. It's not just about being effective and successful. It's also about fulfillment too. So here's our first kind of analogy, and then we'll get into our first step here. If you think of our sense of fulfillment, meaning, and when we're establishing our goals, they're supposed to be used as a compass for us, right? And a compass, as we know, is used for orientation and direction. And problems come up. We don't feel quite right, or we're not achieving the goals we want. For example, if you look on the left-hand side here, when there's interference or if we start to deviate from our own internal compass, okay? So what we're encouraging people to do, again, as much as possible, we know this can't always be absolutely perfect, but because we also have to do our jobs and there might be certain tasks that we have to perform at work that we don't quite enjoy as much, but we want the majority of them to be ones that we enjoy. And on the right-hand side of this slide, the goal here is to look inside yourself for what meaning looks like for you. Don't compare yourself to other people. Don't have your sense of self or purpose come from the outside, like external definitions, societal norms, or comparing yourself to other people, because things are going to happen. Things aren't always going to be perfect. And if, let's say, your sense of professional success for you or meaning comes from how much money you make or something that is external, that could change. And then it could change how you feel about things. So as much as possible, we want this sense of direction and sense of yourself, etc., to come from the inside out, and these goals to come from the inside out as well. So let's look at step number 1. This one is the identifying those external definitions. Any limiting beliefs we might have or rules that we might be kind of carrying around for ourselves that we didn't even realize that may be skewing our direction and what we should be doing in the long run and setting the right goals. And what happens to us on the middle of this slide, understandably, it happens to me as well, is we get caught up in our daily lives and we start to define ourselves externally, like based on the role that we have at our company, what our profession is, our salary, past issues maybe we've had in former positions. And it's really important to pull ourselves out of that and identify for ourselves, do we have any inherited limiting beliefs or beliefs, values, norms, or priorities that came from somewhere else that isn't true to us? Quick example is on this slide. If you have this belief, and you might not even fully realize it, that in order to be successful, I have to be making X amount of money, is that okay with you to have that? Because that could be a hindrance to what your true goals and meaningful goals really need to be. We have had clients before come to us, and one in particular, she was a lawyer, and we were like, well, why are you a lawyer? She said, well, that's what all of my family has always done. We're either doctors or lawyers. We don't want you to choose a path because of that. We want you to choose it, and we want you to choose your goals because you get some meaning out of them in some way, okay? So our first step here is to identify and start to try to discard those external definitions and rules or limiting beliefs that we might have. The ones that don't work for us and we don't want. It's okay if some of them actually do work for us. Like we're saying here on the left side of the slide, our sense of self and your goals, we want as much as possible to come from the inside out versus the outside in. And even if, as I'm saying, or as I have said, with your goals, we realize you can't always set all of your own, the exact ones that you want to. Try to establish and set your schedule during the course of your workday and your actions according to those internal definitions as much as you can. How do you prioritize your time? How do you tackle the tasks or projects that you're performing? Those things can make a difference in your sense of reward and fulfillment. And what we want you to know too, kind of the other good news, is that what we find is when people make small changes here, they actually find that there's really big results. We are not saying with any of this, you have to turn your life professionally or personally upside down to make this happen. Small actions in the direction of your values, etc., can actually make a huge difference for people. This is what we found. So baby steps that you're taking along the way in the next several weeks can make a big difference. For those of you who joined us more recently this morning, or I should say afternoon, please take a look at the chat. There's more information there administrative-wise about receiving the recording of today automatically, as well as the slides. So our goal is, if we look at this next slide, and then I'll show you some action steps to help you with this first step. The goal is to be more like this Mobius strip. That's what this is, this image on the slide here. It is that your internal world and sense of yourself and what's meaningful for you kind of mirrors the external and vice versa as much as possible, that we move in the direction of having that harmony. Doing so will result in more meaningful goals for ourselves. And like we said, we're not looking for perfection here. Small steps can result in really big results. And we want to move in this direction as much as we can. So some of the action steps that you can take as a starting point, and like we said earlier, pick one that makes the most sense for you. You can revisit the slides and the recording later, but we would recommend 4 quick things. This doesn't have to take that long, but a quick self-assessment before you go to bed tonight. Get out a journal, piece of paper, and ask yourself, where am I defining myself incorrectly or externally maybe? What are the rules or beliefs I might have that are just not sitting as well for me because they're not true to me? You may need to start to journal about these or notice them come up or arise over the course of the next several days in order to really understand them. But it's a really big, helpful exercise to do this. As part of this self-assessment exercise, journal about, what does success mean to you? What does it look like at this point in your career? Is it about money? Is it about, who you're helping, et cetera, et cetera? Can take 5 minutes. Another great exercise is to interview other people about, what do they see are your top strengths? What adjectives come to mind when they think of you? This helps you understand what your brand is, but also what some of your goals should be aligned with. Write yourself a new story and start to maybe even journal about this, or some of our clients will create a vision board. Lots of different ways to do this. But what's the story that you want to start telling for yourself in terms of having a more meaningful professional life? What qualities do you want your career to have? What do you want to say about your career at the end of your life? That's a really good one too. And then finally, just a quick writing down and thinking about what fulfills me and what am I passionate about? And am I honoring those things in some way, shape, or form during the course of my day and week professionally? Okay. So our first step, as we said, is to identify these external definitions or beliefs that may not be working for you, moving those aside and replacing them with this new story, new beliefs, etc. Let's talk about step number 2, and this is identifying your values. We encourage all of our clients to identify between 3 and 5 professional values, because if you attach your goals to those values, it's going to be the right thing, as we've been saying. And in order to understand your values, you can start to think about things that you're drawn to at work, in your current job, or even previous jobs. What projects did you really enjoy? When have you worked with someone or a client or a group of people that it was actually really fun for you? What were the elements to that and the themes? And you can even look at passions and interests outside of work in order to identify some of your values. We have our clients dig underneath their dreams, their interests, and passions, because even if those jobs, like let's say if you love photography or something else creative, even if you're not going to go be a photographer, there's an element to your values or clues to your values in that interest. What is cool about that for you? And can you bring either that creativity, that sense of design, or whatever it is into your current work life? Now, the reason why there's a mermaid on the slide here is, as a child, for me, when I was thinking about my career path a long time ago and what I wanted to be when I grew up, as a child, I actually wanted to be a mermaid at Weeki Wachee. I grew up in Florida. We went there a bunch. I was like, that's so cool. And even though being a mermaid was not the most practical thing for me to do as an adult, there were elements in actually that childhood dream, clues to my values. The value of educating people, but entertaining them at the same time. That's part of why I was drawn to that. There was a sense of beauty there, et cetera. And I love playing around with my slides for these webinars, and I love educating people in this way while trying to be somewhat entertaining at the same time too. I also have a value of risk. And as a kid, that kind of seemed like a little bit of a risky job. That's part of why I actually enjoy being a business owner. So even if inside of those passions and interests or childhood dreams, that's not a practical career path. Pull out what some of those values are. Other ways to uncover and define fulfillment and therefore meaning for you so that then you can attach your goals to these things goes back to what we said a moment ago. How do you define success? And identifying, I think, like we said, between 3 and 5 career values and writing those down and saying, okay, what are things that I can do in my professional life now to start to move in the direction of those values? Is there some way that I can adjust my office a little bit to honor those values more? Adjust my schedule or how I tackle certain projects, etc. Knowing and understanding what these values are will help you be more proactive, clear about your goals, and establish goals that are much more meaningful for you. And I'll tell you this, and this sounds kind of silly, but when you are performing a task at work, and you might be like, okay, I've got to get this done, whatever. But if you have your values, for example, posted on your computer screen or on your desk or whatever, and you realize, oh, I'm honoring one of my values by working on this specific project or whatever, it automatically becomes more meaningful for you. And this is part of why we want your values to be front and center so that you're making more conscious decisions in alignment with them. And our last step for today is to align your career goals with our model. And I'm going to go through all of these for a second so you understand what we're looking at here on this next slide. So we've talked a lot about fulfillment already. This is where your values go in this piece of the model on the bottom right. We want you to then try to identify goals that are going to be interesting for you for the course of the next year and each quarter. Like, what are the projects I might want to be working on? What are the tasks I like performing the most? Can I start to incorporate those more in my daily work life, for example? Next, on the left, we want you to look at your strengths and align your goals with your strengths. Now, I know that employers a lot of times may go into your performance review and say, these are the 3 things you're not doing well, and we have to fix those. And those may not always align with your strengths. So there are sometimes things we're going to have to do that maybe don't align with our strengths. But if you're in a place or a job that you're really misaligned, it's probably not the right job for you. A. And B, what we find with your strengths is that a lot of times people can figure out a way, okay, like how can I leverage my strengths to accomplish these specific goals? So as much as you can, you want your professional goals to be in the bucket of your strengths so that they are things that you can achieve as well as be meaningful. We would like you to identify goals related to your past experience and education and future. So for example, what experience would you like to gain in the next 3 to 5 years? And how do we align your action steps now to move you in that direction? The same with education. When I attend a conference on a more regular basis, like a couple of conferences a year, I'm lit up and jazzed for months afterwards. Like, this idea of taking a class to just keep us fresh and challenged is something that I think we discount too much. And we say, oh, I don't have time for it. But what education do you want to add to your repertoire that will move you in the direction that you'd like to move job-wise, but also give you that next kind of refresh or sense of challenge? We would like you to identify and establish goals that are aligned with your personality type. So don't, for example, try to force yourself into action steps or a career path that is extroverted in nature if you are an introverted person. So aligning your goals with who you are personality-wise is a big one too. And then last, but absolutely not least, because these are critically important, is establishing goals for your work environment. What do you want your office to be set up like? As much as you can control for. We know we can't always pick, the corner office. I get that. But what can we do in order to make our office be more effective for us? How can we leverage and be a solid, good part of the corporate culture within our organization? Am I in the right work environment for me, culture-wise, value-wise? Do I believe in the mission of the organization? So thinking about goals related to staying connected to your organization, your colleagues, et cetera, can be really, really helpful too. And then our last one, absolutely critically important, is compensation. Our compensation is part of why we're at work, right? A big part in some ways. So we don't want to leave this one out. But with your compensation, we encourage you to not just think about money, but think about benefits and also opportunities that can move you forward in your career. So can you leverage things at your current job, people, resources, projects, et cetera, in order to move in the direction that you want to move in? So establish at least one goal every single year for each of these pieces of the model. So we want you to have at least one for each one. And if you feel like you need help with this, this is why we're here. As I said at the beginning, there's a link in the chat to schedule a free consult if you'd like to learn more about our services and if it's the right fit for you, or ask any questions from today. You can use the QR code on this slide in order to do that. And if you are a Georgia State alum, let us know. We're happy to give you a coupon code to sign up with us too. And we know that the model is I feel like it's as straightforward as it possibly can be, but it takes a minute to kind of think through this. So that's why we're here if you feel like you need help. So let's review before we go today at the half hour. Our 3 steps are going to be discarding those external definitions, because by the way, if those are in place, you're doing all this other stuff, you're going to hit a wall with those. So we really want you to take these steps in the order presented. Defining fulfillment, your values, sense of meaning. What does success look like to you? What does meaning look like to you? And then finally, establish and attach even your existing professional goals, but also the new one, to your career model or our career model as much as you possibly can. Like we said at the beginning, baby steps moving in the direction can make a huge difference. We've got a webinar coming up. Our next one with Georgia State and Friends of Create Your Career Path is March 25th. If you would like to register for that, you can use the QR code here. We're going to be talking about 5 ways to fix your resume. So getting deeper into specific job search mode there. And in terms of action steps, remember we said at the very beginning, we would love it if right now you would write down, get your pen and paper, computer, whatever you prefer, write down one action step that you will take from the next week. Please find the chat box and put it in there. I'm going to open that up because I'd love to see those. Oh, yeah. So people were asking where the chat box is. It should be next to the Q&A. But if you cannot see the chat box, you know what I'm going to do? Let me put my notes into the Q&A, because for some reason, here's what I said in the chat. And I apologize if that was an issue. Okay, so let me do this. And we will make sure. So do me a favor and go into the chat box if you would. I'm sorry, Q&A box. I keep saying the chat box. I'm putting all of my notes in the Q&A box there. So check that out for me. And in the Q&A, if you would put your action items, 1 or 2, that would be great. It could be anything that makes sense for you. Like we said, it could be identifying your values. It could be reviewing our model in greater depth to say, for example, okay, I've already established my goals for this year. Let me go through the model and make sure all of my goals have one, are aligned with this, okay, with at least one of these pieces. And maybe you want to make some adjustments or add to things. In the Q&A box now are all of the different information, and hopefully you can see it. But what I will say is just a reminder, you'll receive the recording in the slides automatically. So just keep an eye on your email for that. Please feel free to schedule a consult. You can use the QR code there and register for our webinar as well. So first step is to take one action step in the next week to start moving in the direction of establishing and creating more meaningful career goals. Thank you all so very much for your time today. We greatly appreciate